Hello, everyone. So thank you very much for coming, and welcome at Algolia. The idea today is to talk about hiring with two main focuses. The first one would be to talk about how we are hiring in startups, sharing experiences, and having those great speakers and experts, for sure. Sharing their experience and tips to also have some insights to be better at hiring. And the second one will be about being hired. So as a candidate, how we can like interview companies to know if it's a company we would like to work for, ask the right question at the candidate, and making sure also we are in the center of the candidate experience. So just very quickly maybe about Algolia. So Algolia is a search as a service company. So we basically build search experiences on websites and mobile apps. So I think you have seen a bit before, like examples of what we do. And if you have more questions about the product, feel free to ask anyone with Algolia t-shirts or people who feel at home. So just maybe I can introduce the people I'm with, because very happy to be surrounded by such great people. So first, Emily. Emily has joined Algolia, I think, more than 2 years ago, something like about 2 years ago. So she's a developer. She's also very comfortable in like client-facing roles. She's now a manager. We are really happy to have her at Algolia, as you can imagine. So she can definitely talk about how, as a candidate, she can select companies, because she's the one having a lot of choices, and sharing also her experience about how to identify good candidates for our team. Liam, who is also a former Algolia employee, as a brand director, and now he's at MadKudu. He will tell us more about his company, but generally speaking, he has a lot of things to share about hiring and also like branding about companies. He will also share the story of him building the team in Paris of engineers and how he handled it without being either a recruiter or an engineer. I think it's a pretty interesting story. And Marc, who is a lead recruiter from one of the most, I would say, fancy and fast-growing company in Paris called Datadog. I guess you all know it. And so he's leading the tech recruiting, so a lot of insights to share, and also about same, like hiring for his own team. So the idea will be to discuss together about hiring today. And obviously at the end there is a question and answer time, so save all your questions for the panelists. And enjoy. Thank you very much. So just about the format, the idea will be to have, oh yes, I forgot the beautiful pictures. So the idea will be to ask a few questions and to discuss openly about the topics. So yeah, that's the idea. So interviewing a company, so that's what I was mentioning at the beginning. We often talk about hiring as, I have too many things here, as being interviewed, but it's also about choosing the company you will work for and work in. So maybe Emily, as a starter, you could tell us more about, as an engineer, as you have a lot of opportunities to be hired, how do you select and identify the companies? What are like the questions you ask?
Sure, yeah, I think the first thing to think about is the actual selection process. When I was last looking for a job about 2 years ago, I ended up using hired.com. That was my only thing I used in order to try to find a company, because it made it easy for me to put in my selection criteria and then have companies come to me. I think each candidate has their own factors when they look at companies in terms of what they want to join. For me, location was key. I had several different cities I was hoping to relocate to. The size of the company is also really important. the product. I really wanted to start to focus on a product. But again, these were something that were coming personally, and I think there's always going to be a need to match, in terms of candidates' expectations and what the company can provide. But as well, I think something that was interesting in that process was there are a few things I didn't realize I was looking for that Algolia came to me with. So remember Alex Lao, he was a solutions engineer on the team with me as well. He reached out to me on Hired, and he also said, oh, by the way, this company is based in France, and would you be open to international travel? And it wasn't something I didn't even consider as a factor, but it was really interesting to have presented to me. As well, I was looking originally only for front-end development roles. And he said, actually, there is this type of role to be a solutions engineer where you can be client-facing and operate more on the business side of things. And I hadn't even heard of the role. And again, it wasn't even something I had considered as a factor, but he came to me and he presented these options. So I think as well, like as much as candidates might say, this is my selection criteria, it's also important considering, opening them up to other potential opportunities and other factors that maybe they haven't considered.
Interesting. So you have like a list, but open to other suggestions you didn't think about, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So maybe Marc, you can tell us more about as a candidate, when you have those criteria in mind, what kind of questions can you ask to maybe dig into what's going on in real life in the companies?
Okay. So well, there is many ways to interview like a company as a candidate, but I pick some bullet point, some bullet point. First, you should ask in depth question about the culture, the management style, the growth management, and so on and so on. Then you can also like do some back channel. So it means like you can like look at your network, see who is a former worker or someone working in the company. Ask them, like have a chat, have a coffee or whatever, chat with them. Then also you can, that's pretty basic, but you can try the product if there is one. You can also review, so you can also review like all the project that you can find, like basically OSS project. You can review like the blog, you can review mostly like everything that concerns the company. One thing I think you should definitely ask yourself what you're looking for before going to the interview. Means somehow, so maybe you can ask yourself, like, what do you like in your current job, or what do you don't like, and what you want to keep and what you don't want to have, and also like, definitely, just search like about what you want. Then during interviews, you should ask. I think you should ask like interviewers what they think about the company, what they think about like their own career inside the company. If they feel good about the culture, if they feel good about like the impacts that they have into the company. If like things that that we told them during interview process is like promise that we keep or not. And I think that's pretty much. And maybe like last one, you can ask what is the vision for the role. So basically, why we are looking for for this role, and as a candidate, what can you bring on the table? That's pretty much.
So maybe Liam, it makes me think as you were looking for a job recently. So you were looking for like a leadership role. Did you have any specific like thought process? Was it close to what Emily and Marc just shared, or did you have anything to add?
Yeah. So really quickly, when I moved to Paris about 8 years ago, the first 5 years of my career, I ran a blog. So I neither had any work experience nor any necessity to look for a job for a while. It was a nice middle ground. And I've had 2 experiences in the last 2 years where I had to look for a job. One ultimately had me ended up working at Algolia, and the other brought me to MadKudu. And both times I really explicitly wrote out a set of criteria that made me eligible for maybe 7 companies. which is really interesting because on the one hand, I knew that it worked. Well, I'll show you a little bit of my criteria and you'll see what I mean. So after I bankrupted a company I ran, I knew that I wanted to join a company that made it past the step I had made it to, because joining the step that I had failed, it was just like, why would I re-encounter the same problems, but instead of being a founder, being an employee? Like, I mean, I wasn't confident that I could get over those problems because I hadn't. And number two, I really wanted to see what the fields look like on the other side of the fence. And so when I was, and the other side, and one of the things that for me has always been the most important, and I think every candidate should have that as a criteria, I have to love the product. Specifically, I work in marketing, or as I like to call it, branding. It's just a nicer word for marketing. It has a better brand. I think it's impossible to market a product that you don't love. I think the same thing goes for sales. I think the same thing goes for recruiting. I think the same thing goes for solutions engineering. I mean, it's really hard to help someone implement a product when you know it's a pain in the butt to implement. I couldn't get up and do that for 2, 3, 4 years. And so I was fortunate enough to know Algolia for a long time. And I mean, ultimately, I had real discussions with 2 companies that were not at all similar. One was a product called CityMapper, which at the time was about 48 employees. And the other was Algolia, which at the time was about 48 employees. And I had pretty much highlighted like 26 to 50 employees as the space that I wanted to come into. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but among other things, I used to organize a recruitment fair, and I'd sort of blocked off companies by size in that event. One was like 0 to 9, the next was 10 to 24, 25 to 50, 50 to 200, 200 plus. And so in my head, those have always sort of been the stages. It turns out I stayed at Algolia for 50 to 200. And so, I mean, for me, I think it really goes both ways. I mean, when you flip and you become the recruiter, you really want to be talking to someone that knows what they're looking for. I find like the worst thing you can say when you're interviewing for a job is like, I'm happy to come here. I really don't know what I want to do. I just want to figure it out, because it sounds like someone who might in 3 months realize that what they really want to do is join a nonprofit, and the company's not going to be a nonprofit no matter how much they want it to. And so it's really good to know what you want before you start reaching out. And as a recruiter, I always want to make sure that the person knows they want this response, like they want to move from where they are to here, and that what I'm offering is the means for them to get there.
Yeah, makes sense. So you mentioned like being aware of what you want, and maybe like my follow-up question would be for Emily about red flags, like things you don't want to see. How do you identify them? Have you ever identified any red flag during your interviews?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think the first red flags actually come from the job description. So if they say things like, we need 10 years of experience in React, and also you should be a killer marketer, and also can you recruit? You know, I mean, that's probably a sign that their expectations are not realistic, and we're not going to be aligned. As well, I would say using words like ninja or rock star is generally a sign that I'm not going to have a good time on that team.
Is that why you turned out that ninja rockstar position I was trying to recruit?
If you only said wizard. But then once you actually start the process, I think there's a lot of questions that you need to ask. For me, asking questions like, what is your relationship with your manager like? What is your day-to-day? What does your work-life balance look like? And as well, I'm looking for honesty. I think that's you never want to be in a position where your people are obviously sugarcoating, because that also is a turn off to candidates. But you're looking for red flags like, oh well, you know, every Sunday morning I wake up and I start to work. You know, that's not something a candidate wants to hear either. When I'm thinking about my last search, a few red flags that I had specifically for examples, I was speaking to a pretty large agency in New York, and something that my potential manager there said was, oh, well, we're worried that, you know, you won't be a good fit for us because you're not totally up to speed on React, because my previous job had been doing Angular. And it was concerning to me that the obsession over frameworks, which come and go, instead of, you know, core fundamental programming concepts, to me, that was a major red flag. As well, another opportunity I was looking at was to be a manager of a team of back-end devs and trying to teach them to be front-end devs. I was concerned that was also another case of not necessarily setting myself up for success in that role. So I think everybody's going to have, their own red flags. It really comes down to asking the right questions and trusting your gut.
Can I add on that? Sure. I had so the reason. So among other things, I hired a team of engineers for the company when I joined, and one of the first candidates that we got like to the end of the process. I mean, they had done like the assignment, they had met all of the founders. I was having lunch with them because we didn't have an office yet, so that was the on-site. The on-site was I took them out to lunch. It was fun, and I really liked the guy. Like he reminded me of myself a lot, and he like all of the hard skills. He checked them off. He even had some of the like bonus ones. Like I love self-taught engineers. That's just like my secret passion. Like I love someone who's like, I never studied it. I just went on the internet and now I can do it. But we kept having these like yellow flags that came up that I kept wanting to ignore. It was like, oh yeah, like I was working at a big giant tech company for a bunch of years, and I ended up leaving because all of the management was stupid and they didn't know what they were talking about. And I was like, oh, maybe the management was stupid. Okay, we'll just move on. Like, and we got all the way to the end, and then we did all of our back channels, and all of them came up the exact same. Like, this dude's a genius. He can learn anything. Like, he jumps around on problems. Like, but he doesn't get along well with management. And like it kept, and we're a company that was at the time we were 5 people on 2 different continents, 9 hours of time zones away, and like you can't have bad communication skills between an employee and the manager that early on when you're trying to build it. And I find that like it's so easy to check for hard skills and want to have hard skills outweigh soft skills, but at the end of the day, like the soft, I almost feel like this, like you can learn a new language, but you can't learn to not be an asshole. Like it's kind of just embedded.
It's harder.
It's harder. Trust me, it's very hard.
I think it's a good point because you split it between hard skills and soft skills. It makes me think that during interviews you won't be only evaluated on your technical skills and coding skills. So I guess Marc, you're totally aware of the fact that all the questions are not just about what you know and what you're able to build. What kind of tips could you share for candidates who are like preparing for an interview? Maybe for those kind of questions about behaviors, like how to anticipate those kind of questions.
About behavior?
About like interview questions, generally speaking, like how to prepare for an interview.
Well, again, do some research about the company. Be sure you can speak concisely and about like every detail of your resume. I guess it's fair game for interviewers. So you can do like what we call stars and stars. So stars and stars is a situation, task, action, result. And then, so be honest. Please don't do any bullshit. Like never work. Like we always discover like things after that. And please show enthusiasm and just show like some interest about the company, etc. etc. Well, for me, I think it's like I don't feel like whatever. For engineering, I guess you should practice some code on the paper. I know like some company does like whiteboard coding, some don't. But just in case, like if it's happening, just like try before, because it's very hard to write the code by like on the whiteboard and not like.
Do you do some whiteboard exercises at Datadog?
Yeah, so we do whiteboard exercise, but we also give the the option to do on the laptop. It's just because we are trying to make them as comfortable as possible, and I know, and we all know that it's like very stressful to have an interview. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Just wanted to go back on the STAR method because I think it's a very good takeaway if you're going to the hiring part. If you're an interviewer, it's a tool we also use at Algolia, and I'm sure a lot of companies are using. It's how to ask relevant questions during an interview. Like presenting a situation, so trying to figure out first where the candidate was, what he was doing, like trying to dig into their experiences, understand the task they were doing, ST action, yeah. So what action they took in a very specific situation, and what was the result. It's a good way to base your thoughts on the past behavior, and not just like, what are you doing in your job, generally speaking. And it helps to have information to take the right decision. So it brings me to hiring, which is when you have the other hat about like being an interviewer. It's also very challenging, especially in startups, because I think we are all aware that like finding the right people, especially when you're like growing and defining who you want to be, is definitely the most challenging part as we grow. So maybe, Emily, you can start by telling us more about what's your thought process, what's your strategy to define your need when you're hiring for your team?
Yes, I think there's a few things. So by needs, do you mean like what's outlined in the job description essentially that a candidate sees?
Yeah. So when you see that you have some needs within your team, which can be about like a new project, or like just being overwhelmed, like how do you define what, like, the requirements on what you need to be successful in the team?
Sure, yeah, I think this harkens back a little bit to what Liam was saying about hard versus soft skills. I think that the hard skills are much easier to nail down. So for example, right now I'm hiring for my team, and I know that this person needs to be comfortable in JavaScript. They need to have X numbers of experience. And again, this is something that's a little bit more wishy-washy. I actually kind of want to come back to that in a second, because that's an interesting one. But there are certain hard skill needs, like can they code, yes or no, where that's a very clear need. But then when it comes to soft skills, that I think is where it's more crucial to take the time to really consider what you need. For me, it was a willingness to learn other language. It was an ability to work autonomously. This particular role is going to be 9 hours from where I'm located. So if that person can feel comfortable making their own decisions, that's very, very crucial. And attention to detail as well. Part of this is going to be delivering projects to clients. So they need to be able to be sure that this is something that is a professional delivery. Empathy as well for me was because they're going to be client facing. So being able to speak with clients, be empathetic. This is all specific to the role, but again, it's coming from those needs, and that's harder to nail down. As well with the years of experience, I think that's a very tricky one, because if you're looking at ensuring diversity within a team, it's pretty well known that minority groups are less likely to apply if they don't hit the bar of experience, where majority groups will apply even if they don't hit that bar. So that's something that I tend to try to avoid, or I really put truly the minimum amount, 1 year, just to, if I really want somebody who's quite senior. To be honest, I would prefer to keep it out in certain cases as well. I think it depends a little bit on the role. And then of course the actual job description then encapsulate all these needs. It's a job pitch as well, I think. You never want to read a description that's like, 10 years this, 10 years this. Would you ever apply for that job? You want to ensure that the candidate can understand how those needs translate into the responsibilities they'll be having at the position.
It makes sense. So when you're saying that you're defining like the criteria for the requirements, are you putting all of them in the job description, or do you just select because you were saying like the minimum? So how do you write them down? What do you just write the hard skills? Do you also include the soft skills?
Yeah, I definitely include both. So in terms of like pure job description, there's just sort of the general paragraph about what a day-to-day might look like, what some of the core team responsibilities are, and then sort of bullet points about responsibilities, focusing, I think, again, like a little bit of a tilt on client, like if you're saying, being able to run client meetings, that also translates then into empathy, into being remote that translates into autonomy. As well, I think it's really important to split out the nice to haves from the must haves and to make that very transparent to candidates. For example, some of my nice to haves were experience using Photoshop, but it really is a nice to have. So there's no need to put it into a must have, and again, have somebody who could potentially be a very good fit count themselves out of the equation.
And so, Liam, you were looking for engineers in Paris. So obviously you want to hear this story. But generally speaking, were you the one defining the need? How did you partner with the people within the team to make it work?
Yeah. Well, partnering with people in the team was easy. We were only 5 people, so it was really me and the CTO and me and the CEO. So I joined MadKudu, a company that I had met while I was with Algolia. And essentially they had made the decision that the French founders based in California wanted to open a Paris office and build the majority of their engineering team here for a number of very interesting reasons. But the biggest one is French people are nicer, basically. I mean, like they started recruiting people. So specifically MadKudu is based in Mountain View. I don't know if you've heard of the town Mountain View, but there's another company based there. And what we found is that a lot of the people that we were interviewing were more interested in their financial gain than in their ability to learn or be a professional, which is contrary to my experience interviewing and being interviewed in Paris, which is that people here tend to be interested in what they're going to do more than how much they're going to make while having the title of the thing they're supposed to do. And so for a lot of cultural reasons, they quickly found themselves wanting either all of France to move to Mountain View, or what was more easy was to put an office here. And so the task that I had when I joined was to go from 0 to 5 employees as quickly as possible. And so I gave myself 3 months to do it, which, as you guys know, is completely reasonable, right? Very reasonable for an unknown company to hire 5 engineers. And basically, one, the founders had outlined what they wanted, and 2, that changed all the time, especially when you're hiring the first one of anything. Essentially, every time someone gets farther than they should have, and you have to have a very awkward end of conversation, like we should have said no at the beginning, we're so sorry, then you have to rewrite the specs on the position. And so that happened more for the position I ultimately didn't recruit for, which was VP engineering, which having seen what a good VP engineering looks like ends up being a hard position to recruit for, and happened a little less with the data engineering role. But essentially, recruiting an engineer is a lot like doing marketing for a dev tools company, which I had done before. So I'd never recruited before, but I had done marketing for Algolia. And the amount of technical knowledge that you need to have is about the same as what you need in order to be able to say, go to like Laracon as a non-engineer and just sound smart enough before handing them off to someone reasonable. And so that was a lot of my job, was one, knowing what a good candidate looked like, which ended up being, so we were recruiting data engineers, ended up being really easy. There's like 3 types of data engineers. There's like ones doing the stuff that's going to be relevant in 5 years, and then the 2 other categories don't really matter, but they split into 2 categories. And so we filtered by that. Most data engineers self-identify, which was really nice. It wasn't an ambiguous thing where you're hiring for a solutions engineer, but they're looking for a front-end engineering position, and you have to like change their mind. And the other thing was, because I had experience in engineering and developer-centric companies, I had a pretty good idea of where engineers doing that job were today. For example, there are a handful of companies. Some of them are big and really gross. And so I had a feeling that I could easily attract those people, because who wants to be working at AXA, period? Sorry. Are there any AXA employees? Apologize. And then there were only a handful of startups that had data engineers. And so I would reach out to them.
So yeah, you were the one reaching out. Can you tell us more about this experience, trying to contact engineers, mostly on LinkedIn, I guess?
Yeah, mostly on LinkedIn. Then very quickly found out about, have you heard of GitHub? GitHub, have you heard of this? So I found out about that as well. Turns out also engineers are also there. But yeah, mostly it was cold outreach. No one had ever heard of our company. For the most part, no one has still. There's 300 more people who have at the end of this process. And so I kind of had two objectives. One was expect that 90+% are gonna, if they read it, say no. And therefore, two, make sure that they at least walk away thinking we're an interesting company. And so I was more there to pitch why someone like that person might be interested in what we're doing right now, rather than saying, I want to talk to you. And so we did a lot of things that don't scale, which you can do really early on because you have more time and less needs. We didn't have, I don't know, how many recs do you have to fill this quarter? 1 million? Yeah, okay. So I had one role and there was 3 people who could slot into it. So it was really just whoever, I could talk to anyone. And so a lot of what I tried to focus on, I got really lucky. So the first position we were hiring is data engineering. Our product is data engineering as a product, essentially, which means I could talk to a lot of people who were doing what is generally, like at AXA, a very unsexy job of like ETL stuff and like handling pipeline, but really getting no like product side experience. And I could say like, you're going to be doing your job, but in production for customers all day long, and everything you do, you're going to immediately see an impact. And so I tried to sell the emotional impact of going from being a behind the scenes role to being a front and center role, which was true. It was nice not to have to lie, but I think in general, that's the type of things that I tried to tap into. It was like, this is what you were going to get out of this coming from here. It was a lot harder to pitch Datadog employees that, as it turns out. I think I reached out to your entire office and they all said, that's nice.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Thanks, but no thanks. But they said thanks, so so it went well. But yeah, I reached out to every single data engineer that I could find over the course of 6 weeks, and somehow convinced 3 of them to join.
It's a big achievement, I think. So yeah, you just mentioned Datadog. I think it's a good example of company like having a good branding for engineers, like a good place to work, basically. How do you think? So first of all. How do you think companies and startups can build this image of being like a good place to work for engineers? Do you have any tips to share to the people? And what can we do to make sure engineers consider the place as a good place to work?
Well, I think you should have technical challenges consistently, like that aligns with software like engineers' goals and career. You can work on your company branding, like by many ways, like by having presence in like tech event, conference, like in maybe a blog, an engineering blog. You can work on diversity and inclusion, for example.
You have you have someone now working on events and tech events from the recruiting team, right? Being involved in those events.
Yeah, so we have someone working for recruiting marketing.
Okay.
So basically, he works on all events for hiring purpose. So he will identify tech meetups, conference, and so on, and we will like work on how we can, at some point, go and pitch and hire people from there. Yeah.
Okay, and so you were mentioning like those events. Emily, you were mentioning job description. Do you have other ideas of what can be done about branding to be considered as attractive companies? Or
I think you should work on the culture as well, making sure, because at some point employees will like lean to like bring people if they feel good. So you should work on that. Having like again like all the promise that you made at the beginning, just like keep it, give them all they need, and so on. You want to say something about that?
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I asked a question. So when I first started hiring, I thought, wow, like I could make my first hire be a woman or someone. Like, why would I not go the extra mile to try to figure that out? And I reached out on Twitter. Thank you, Twitter. And I asked, what do I have to do to make my first engineering hire a woman? I know that there are women who do this job. I've found them. What am I not doing that I could be doing? And the response I got is a response that I kind of expected, which was, well, the best way is just to be somewhere that a woman wants to work. And the best way to have a good company culture is to have a good company culture. That's the best way for it to show through. And you know, the best way to be a great place to work is to be a great place to work. And I find that it's both something, one, that is very hard to control, especially on an individual level inside a company that's more than 3 people. Just because I can't make MadKudu anything different than what it already is. I can only try to describe it and maybe articulate it a little more easily so that people have a better time articulating it to other people than they might otherwise. And so I guess my point is, on the one hand, it's good to work on figuring out the 5 words you want to put on the side of your meetup space, because it's good to have bricks that you can come back to that are easy and easy to remember. But on the other hand, it kind of just has to be there already. I mean, I can't speak about being a person of color, being a female joining a company, but the general feedback that I've gotten is like, one, don't do stuff that is explicitly douchey is probably the best word I would come up with. Apologies. And the other thing is, like, just be the decent human, like be a decent place already to work. Like, and I personally find that very difficult as someone trying to recruit who isn't a recruiter. Like, I don't have a quota that I have to hit. I could literally just spend all of my time trying to get one woman to join our company, but I have no idea. I don't even know what levers exist to push those forward. So I don't know if this is a response or a question. Yes, please do.
I think that the one thing I would say about diversity hiring, this is something that obviously I care deeply about, but you always want to make sure to start at top of the funnel as possible. So for example, something that we're considering doing is starting to sponsor more meetups that are women focused, starting to try to find other avenues for sourcing. You never ever want to be in a position where a person in a minority group joins and they have any sort of concerns about, oh, I was only hired because I was the token person. That's not a good way to start a company. And I think that also goes towards the company culture as well. So educating everybody internally about why diversity is important, but also that we're not going to ever hire somebody because they're X or Y, because that can spread very quickly and can become very toxic, I think. Even beyond sourcing, I think once a candidate enters the process, something that I always appreciate to see is care being taken to be as unbiased as possible. And I think that goes both ways, like being unbiased in terms of you never want to be too lenient, but also unbiased in terms of recognizing subconsciously how you might perceive another person. That's super crucial. So making sure when you're asking questions, you know, it's clear that you're going after something that's the root of it and not necessarily, you know, I mean, the obvious question is like, are you looking to become pregnant? You would never want to ask that, but there's deeper questions there as well. And I think something Algolia does particularly interestingly is that we ensure that the panels that candidates speak with are diverse and represent, you know, diversity in terms of both minority groups, but also just jobs and roles. And I think that gives in terms of candidate experience, it helps you recognize that I'm joining a team. You know, I'm joining a group of people who come from different mindsets, who come with different goals. You're not just speaking to, you know, developers. And I think that's its own sort of form of diversity.
So jumping about culture, I know it's hard, like, to please everyone in the workplace and to do like big changes inside the office. But again, I think like people are like looking for something as a candidate, and as like the recruiting team is working on like making sure we will hire people that will fit into the current like culture. We won't like add people even that they are good or like exceptional if they don't feel the culture, if we don't please them later, you know what I mean? So in some point, you can stay attractive for like some people, like a bunch of people, and you will like definitely be not attractive for like the rest of it. But again, like you are looking for hiring people that like fits with like your goals. It's just more about that. Yeah, that's what I think.
I think at Algolia we find it a bit difficult sometimes, like this tension between culture fit and diversity, because I think as we are, as you said, we are human beings, so it's tempting always to hire people who look like us, to just identify people who could have been here before, and just limit the risk. And what I found very exciting about diversity is also trying to have someone who will challenge this culture and always have this common ground with the values. So when you were mentioning on the wall, but I think it's challenging to have this balance. I don't know what you think about that, about like this diversity and culture fit question. Do you feel something about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very good point. Is that balance between, like, there's always going to be that part of you that thinks, oh, this person would be great to grab a beer with. So, you know, I'd like to hire them. And that's, you know, that's how people also vote for presidents. And that's also not a good way to do things. And I think that you always have to, when you're interviewing somebody, really take a step back again, like consider your own biases, consider your own subconscious, and then remove yourself from that. And again, this isn't something that anybody can do overnight. It's so hard. I think as well, it's a little bit more obvious. I think there are more well-known biases people have with certain minority groups. But I think there are other minority groups, like, for example, socioeconomic backgrounds, where the way a person speaks might be different than how you're accustomed to, and you have preconceived notions about their educational status as a result. And that's something that, you know, people aren't as used to examining. So I think really the answer is self-awareness. But again, that's not something that's easy, and that's not something that, you know, you aren't going to have to work at. And I know I have to work at this, and I'm sure that everybody else on this stage probably has their own thing.
I think that's a good conclusion for this panel. So thank you very much. I think it's the best timing for questions, if you have some, to dig into these hiring questions. Thank you very much. Catchbox. Who wants to start? Maybe you can introduce yourself first, or what you're doing, just to make sure they answer you right.
I'm Max, head of customer solutions at Stuart, and maybe my question is a bit too specific, but it's about the recruiting solution engineers, which I find it a bit hard because of what Liam said, because you need to turn developers to be solution engineers, or find already existing solution engineers from other companies. So my question is, do you have any tips for recruiting solution engineers?
So yes, to be honest, it's been something that's historically tough for us. There's no question that it's been one of the harder roles to fill. When I source, something that I look for is their developer, but there's something different with their profile. So perhaps they've worked at an agency, and you know they have that client-facing experience that way. Perhaps they've, in their spare time, spoken at conferences or done classes or other educational events that indicates that they're also keen on helping others learn. I look for self-taught or attended a boot camp or something that indicates a slightly different path to becoming an engineer. I find that historically those people are often quite successful as solutions engineers. When I think about our team at Algolia, I think almost half of us don't actually have a computer science degree. And I'd like to think we're all doing reasonably well at our jobs. So what else? And then I think that the second half to that question is, how do you convince somebody who is looking for, you know, a front-end development role that they might actually want to consider, you know, something that is a little bit outside of their initial comfort zone? For me, that first touch was so important. So really having a strong pitch as to why this is going to, you know, be more exciting than your day to day, as a software developer. For me, I would never go back. I love that I get to have my hands in so many different projects. I love that every day isn't the same. And I think that will speak to a certain type of people, and people will often self-select. There's definitely folks who you'll talk to, and you can kind of tell right away that the role isn't necessarily for them. They're more just interested in the company, and so they'll be like, yeah, sure, I guess I could do that, but I really want to code. So I think as well having a little bit of empathy and listening to them and understanding like, maybe this isn't the right role, and then pushing them perhaps to maybe there's a pure software engineer role in your company. So I think also listening to the tells that people will give in interviews. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Do you have other questions?
Solutions engineer?
Thank you. Sure, I want to send it. Okay.
Thibault, working as a freelance for a recruiting company, actually, on digital innovative solutions. My question is, we're talking about recruiting, but more and more developers now go freelance, like I did. And where do you draw the line? How do you make the choice to go for recruiting someone internally versus getting someone freelance? How do you make that decision? And I suppose you do.
Oh yeah, I might have an interesting answer for that. I'm terrible at working with freelance people personally. Like in all of the positions I've ever been in, it's not been something I'm fantastic at. I'm good with suppliers because I've done event organization, but that's a specific kind of relationship. And at the company I'm currently at, they love working with freelance people. They're basically like, you better have a great argument for why we need this person for 40 hours every week for the next 8 years. Otherwise, like, what is it? Updesk, Upwork, Workdesk, Desk, whatever, the freelance marketplace, whatever, Upwork. Like they love working with people for freelance. So I think the biggest thing is it's a muscle to build. And I think historically, there's a startup mindset which is very focused on reinventing the wheel, which is like, we managed to build a product that didn't exist before we built it. So obviously, like, we need to keep all of our knowledge internal. And there's just there's a lot of reinforcing mindset. The thing that initially makes you successful really encourages this idea of like, it's a long-term investment. Invest in the people. You want people who are passionate and motivated by the long-term success. And the freelance contract doesn't align on that. And it's very hard to take that step to say, like, what is design a short-term investment? That's a very common freelance thing for someone to be a designer. But you'll find an internal design team at Algolia, and arguably that was a very good decision because I like those people. And so I think one, it depends a lot on the culture of the company, to answer your question. And number two, it's really hard to make an investment in that short term of a relationship that ultimately if it works well, you're going to want it full time anyway. And so it's always a short term solution. Right? Either it gets the job done and it was a temporary thing and I no longer need it, or it works and so I want to lean into that. It's a channel for user acquisition or candidate acquisition, or it's a channel for growth, or it's a channel for product development. And any of those, if any of those things leeches on, you want to go further. And so then the mindset that really reinforces that is, well, if I know that that's going to be a thing, if I'm sure from the get-go it's going to be a thing, I might as well hire it full-time right away. And if I'm not sure, maybe I'll just do that. Maybe I'll just have someone whose job it isn't to do that, do it. And then once we figure out it is a thing, we'll hire someone, which is where you get those jobs of like, you need to be a social media expert and also you're our CTO. So I don't know if that answers the question well. Do you guys want to add anything on it? No? That's fair. Okay, let's take it at that.
Can you throw that away?
Hello, I'm Amaury. I'm working at Privatism. And recently I came across a candidate who had a falling out with his boss. And he told me quite candidly that they didn't align on values anymore. But I had the feelings that there are things that were untold. So my question is twofold. The first one is, how a candidate can present such a situation in a good way. And the second one is how I can identify and go to the roots of the issue and identify if it's something that will be an issue at my company or not.
Might be in a really good position to answer that. Yeah, but I mean specifically. I'll try to answer with both my experience and the experience hiring someone. So I told you that story earlier. We had a really good candidate from super duper awesome tech company where all of the engineers wanted to be at the time he was there. At the time they were there. Well, I guess I've given the gender away. And it didn't work out because when we started to have, one, he wasn't forthcoming with that conversation. Two, the way he explained it did not line up with the way other people explained it. And that's just friction. It really wasn't up to us to figure out whether we weren't making a character assessment of the person. We were making an assessment of whether this candidate was going to fill this role and contribute to a long-term success for the company, especially for an early stage company. And so it was less about judging the person and whether who's telling the truth, and more about the fact that this person was unable to create a scenario where the two versions of the story were the same, good or bad. And so to bring that home a little more, so the story with me and Algolia is I didn't quit Algolia or leave Algolia. I was let go of Algolia. I was let go on very good terms because I'm still standing here, but I was let go. And so when I went out to go talk with other companies, I had to square that story with the story I was going to tell. And specifically with MadKudu, Algolia is a customer of ours, which is how I knew the company. And on top of that, our CEO, who was the person I reported to, is an investor in our company. And so no matter what the scenario was, I knew that two sides of that story were going to be told. And that was very fortunate for me because I knew it going into it. I was very cognizant of the fact that whatever version of the story I was going to tell about my time in Algolia, there was going to be another one. I didn't have to worry about whether they'd get a back channel or would they use my reference or maybe they knew the investor. I knew who they knew, and they knew everyone pretty much. They knew a good portion of my colleagues. They knew my N+1. They knew the investors. We have common investors. I mean, they had the story panned out. And so, but I would argue for candidates going into it that you should just assume that's the scenario, because the thing that recruiters know is you almost always have a way to get a back channel version of that story. And so for me, I ended up having my on-site out in Mountain View, and I sat down for the first 55 minutes of the 1 hour meeting talking with the CEO about here's all the stuff I could do, here's what I've done in Algolia, here's what I think you guys should do, you guys are here, I want to get you guys to here, here's how we can do it, I love what you guys are doing, this is what I think about your product and about your brand, and I put it all on the table, everything I thought I could bring to the table. And at the 55-minute mark, the CEO stopped me and he said, that's super awesome, like I wouldn't be talking with you if my co-founder hadn't already told me that you knew what you were doing, but why aren't you you haven't asked me a single question the entire time. And what I did is I explained the situation, and this was before the back channels. I said, look, I'm just going to tell you, like, I got let go of Algolia. This is what happened. I don't want to make the same mistake that led to that happening this time than I did previously. And by being forthcoming with that story and about explaining where I was coming from in the interview process, what I found out later is that's basically the reason they hired me, is because I was forthcoming with that story. And if you look at it from a recruiter perspective, you're really trying to mitigate risk of someone having to be let go for something that came up during the interview process doesn't look great. It's the equivalent of a salesperson being like, yeah, we knew they didn't have budget, but we moved forward with it anyway, and we found out at the very end that they didn't have budget, right? It's just not an error you want to be caught. It's like a forced error, they call it in baseball. Like, it's a really stupid mistake. And so you really want to, from a candidate perspective, go in and tell an honest story. And that's a lot of when we're talking about knowing what you're looking for. Like when I went looking for my next job after Algolia, I knew I wanted to be in a position to not make the same mistakes that I had made previously. And I knew I wanted to come into a position where I could grow back into what I had, what I wanted to have before. And so I think like from a candidate perspective, being honest with yourself and being explicit about what you're looking for. And from a recruiter perspective, all friction looks bad. If someone says they know how to code and React and then you have them do a test and they're like, I'm not really feeling it today, that's friction, right? Anything that doesn't really square up, it's kind of like being a lawyer. Like you're just kind of looking for, or a police detective, like where does it not line up? And so I think like having one version of the story that everyone tells is a great way. Whether it's true or not is kind of arbitrary at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hello. So first, I would just wanted to give a little feedback about how you often talked about roles instead of talking about jobs. It was actually very pleasant to hear that. It kind of highlights the fact that it's about the person actually doing something, bringing something to the table, and not just gaining salary or something. And then my question is about GitHub. You, at some point, you talked about it as a place where developers are, but do you actually use it as an actual recruitment tool? And if you do, how do you do it?
Oh, that's a great question. No, I just, so specifically with GitHub, we found that not all developers have a very fleshed out and publicly visible LinkedIn profile. Shocker, I know.
Exactly.
And however, we found that if we were looking for people who knew Scala, we could probably go into the Scala repository and look for people who are following it, filter by people who self-declared the country, continent, or a city they were in, and then use that as a beginning basis for building out a candidate list.
Have you actually succeeded recruiting people doing this kind of procedure?
Let me do a quick mental. So we ended up hiring 3 out of 300 people. So I can't remember how I met every one of them. 2 of them were from direct outbound, which means I either found them on LinkedIn or on GitHub.
Okay.
And one of them was through a recruitment solution. I can't remember which one it was. I think I had really good conversations with, I'd say, about 5 people who we identified who had put their GitHub up online. Like they had their email on their GitHub profile. It was a pretty fleshed out profile and it looked like it lined up with what we were doing. We didn't end up hiring, but that's almost kind of arbitrary sometimes. But it's definitely, like for us, it was definitely a good way to find people who weren't necessarily on the first line of availability. Especially like we were looking for people who already had jobs. That sounds really silly. Especially in engineers, I think that's everyone. But in this, like, we were really looking for people who were already actively doing the thing that we needed. We just wanted to convince them to point their awesomeness towards us instead of towards something else. And so GitHub ends up being a really good place for that because it has a timeline of ways in which you've been awesome.
Okay, thank you. And just one little thing, we talked about diversity in recruitment. And for those of you who are interested, I attended another TechLunch, I'm sorry, here for the International Women's Day, and we kind of talk about the same subject. So if you're interested, if it was filmed, I guess it was, definitely check it out. It was a great conversation there. Thank you.
And just to finish, maybe there is a link also with your question about GitHub. I think GitHub is a good link to identify profiles like top contributors and also just to find the email addresses and see what the persons are focusing on. But at some point, it also leads always to the same kind of people, like people who have basically time to do open source on their spare time. So I think not only sourcing on GitHub is also a good strategy if you want to have like a more diverse panel. So yeah, that's also something I had in mind.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Alexandra, working for Ignition Program as a recruiter. And I have a question regarding your process for recruiting tech people, and especially with time. How do you manage time? Because those profiles are really, I don't know if we can say rare, or they find jobs really quickly. So when you have a position to fill, how do you manage time? How long does your process takes? And how do you do it?
Maybe you want to take this one, Marc?
So our process takes an average time of 20 days. It's like in 4 stages. You have like 4 steps. The recruiter front screen, the technical phone interview. Then we send a take-home test. So basically, this is where we lose lots of times. And then you have in-person interview. Well, I would say how we manage it. It's true, like people will find a job easily because the market is big, right? But I think as soon as people that invest time, like people, if they want to work with us, like because they try the product, they like the product, they know that they have like challenging project. So even if it takes more time, they will in some point accept it, because like this interview is not just about like assessing, but it's also a way for them to shine, to shine and to see to show like why they're like why we should have them and not like somebody else. I would say we as a company need to work on making sure that the candidate experience is the best as possible. So by for example, we have this rule of the interviewers needs to fill out his scorecard within 24 hours. So we are able to give a feedback like one business day after. And if not, like we will make sure that sending an email to just tell them like we're still waiting and reviewing. I think that's like how we make it. Maybe we are lucky, I would, because we have like a product that keep like engineers' interest. That helps. And I think as soon as like your one thing you can work like as a company to stay attractive is it's like it's being successful, give you like this power and ownership to like keep candidate in the process, even they have like other process.
I think it's also like a both-way relationships. I heard sometimes that candidates find processes too short or too light, and it's also sending the wrong message, because it just means that you are hiring a bit quickly and that you don't really care about who you're looking for. Because when you are a very demanding recruitment process, the information you send is we care a lot about who we're gonna pick. So you will be surrounded by people who follow the same process. So like it's optimized in a way that you could find interesting people around you.
Oh, can I add something? I forgot. Yeah. And also you can, as a company, work on be agile with your process. For example, we hired someone through GitHub by sourcing his code. He was like doing like a project very similar as what we have about tracing, and he was the main contributor of it. So basically, we like as soon as we reach out to him and we start talking, we just like remove the take home, because we review all his code already. So this kind of things, like make sure like you give like the best experience and make them feel like you're a partner as a recruiter, you're a partner, you will help them to have the job and have like the job that they want. So I think
Thanks.
Yeah, welcome.
If I can just plug Lever really quickly. So I'm not a recruiter, and I'm also not meticulous, which means like my follow-up is terrible. It's also why I'm not an SDR. The first thing I did is I got the software that Algolia had for our company, which is called Lever, and I find that really good software creates a really great candidate experience. It's pretty amazing how just having something that automatically like sets up meetings, automatically reminds you when a meeting is done, automatically reminds you to like give feedback, like just building an automated process and also being able to measure it. Like we were very quickly able to identify the longest part of our interview process, and then we looked at why it was, and we found out it was time zone differences. It was we had a meeting with our CTO. Our CTO was really busy in the morning, but the morning was the evening here, and it was the only time that we could interview candidates. So we just had to move his schedule around for the next few weeks, and we reduced the candidate life cycle by like 12 days. And so just looking at the process from a data perspective and trying to automate that is super helpful. You can do a lot as one person with a really good piece of software.
Maybe
Hello.
last question.
So my name is Vincent. I'm a 42 student. I got a question both for Algolia and Datadog, which is about staff turnover.
so how often are there departure or firing, and how do you assess the role recruitment could have played in this?
Do you want to start?
Well, so turnover here in can you hear me? Okay, turnover here at Datadog Paris. So we are 120 now. We were 10 like 2 years ago, and we have 2 people left in 2 years. So how do we assess that? It's complicated to assess that, but what we can tell is as we grow, like we know that we are going to have more and more turnovers, like for different reasons. People that want to have like new challenges, people that want to have like more early stage, and those kind of things. I don't know, like it's hard to like the turnover is low here in Paris, but in New York, turnover is more important, especially because like the market is more like on the fly. Everyone is like can have a job everywhere. But yeah, we're trying to do as much as we can, like on a day-to-day, to make sure like people like stay. And like I think like the HRBP role like helps a lot. You know, by listening, like having follow-up with employees, like yeah, helping them to make sure like they answer all the questions they have. If they feel like something is going wrong, they can go and talk to them. They are not like HR, like as we imagine. They are really like business partners. So they have this role of like helping the employee to feel good like on day to day.
Yeah. So I joined Algolia a bit less than 3 years ago. So for me, it was really tough to see the first departure, like in the past months. I really thought it was something weird and that something was going really wrong. At some point, I think it's also healthy to have people leaving, just because they feel that they would like to work, I don't know, in a smaller startup or on other projects. That's why that's what I liked about Liam answered, like having data about why people are leaving, understand where it's going and what we try to do. At some point, I think it's not anymore a question of recruitment, but more a question of like within the company, like the growth opportunities. For me, the recruitment question is really about maybe, I don't know, the 6 first months, something like that, to limit the ownership and the responsibilities, to make sure it's clear and where we can have an impact to avoid those kind of things. I think, and it goes back to the beginning of the presentation, being really clear about the role and what we can offer, not sugarcoating it, and making sure that it's clear for the people what they will do on a daily basis is super important. Because at the end of the day, if you're exaggerating or making up stories about the reality, people will leave after a few months. So making sure they have a clear idea of what we do, how we do it, I think is really, really important. And to keep people, I think there are no like secret sauce. It's just making sure they are always not just challenged, but that they can keep learning. I think that's what drives people, like just feeling that they are still in a growth mentality. And the other thing is also, you know, like small things like compensation, for example. It's not a big word. It's like we need to make sure that we align the people in the company as we grow, as we are hiring more and more people, making sure the early employees have the fair salary and that they will stay with us for that too. I think it's important. So yeah, just making sure you have a look not only on the people coming, but also in the people who are already here, because they have a lot of value in the company. Okay, last. Dribbling.
So Victor Paris from Tukantoko. I just have a quick question. Can you tell us about 2 failed attempts at hiring tech guys?
2 failed attempts?
Yeah.
Oh, can I tell my story that I told from earlier? Yeah. So I reached out to 300 people. And at one point I came across someone who I had actually hired previously. in the past. I won't say from where or for who because the story didn't go great for either person. And I kind of waited. I was like, in my experience, trying to bring people you know into a company is just, it makes it way too hard. You're very emotionally invested in it. You want them to win. Like trying to hire a former colleague, like it's just not. I try to avoid it, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna keep a rational mind about this. I'm gonna reach out, and I don't know why, but I wrote their first name wrong, despite the fact that I'd known them for a good amount of time, and that was bad. And I would say I think it's something that happens all the time with recruiters. I try not to take it personally when someone spells my name wrong, unless they spell it wrong and it's funny. Like if they call me Lima, the capital of Peru, I find that funny. Or if they, I don't know what other mistake you can make, then it's funny. But they responded in a very, very bad way and very publicly. They started yelling at us on Twitter with a screenshot of the email. Oh, the other part of this story is I wasn't reaching out from myself. I was reaching out from our CEO's email account. So it was our CEO reaching out. Yeah, right. I guess that makes it an important detail of the conversation. So one, they didn't know it was me reaching out. And number two, our CEO had no idea what was going on. I mean, he knew I was reaching out on behalf. That was how we'd set up the recruitment process. And so that was a situation where one, it really validated the fact that that person probably shouldn't be in our company because they yelled very, very loudly about something relatively nominal, like calling one French person name another French person name. There's only like 7 names. It's just a roulette at this point. Sorry. But it's something that happens. I file that away as like honest mistake. Like I've never had more. I have a lot of respect for the recruiter job before. I have so much more now. Like the amount of things that you just have to do all the time, and like you get hit a lot more for the little mistakes than you do for the big wins. Then you don't really get a lot of credit for like I had 7 people respond to an email I sent today is actually kind of big when usually it's 0. So that was a big fail on my part. But maybe go for it.
So my biggest fail ever, I think, it was in my previous company. I was working at Criteo, and I hired somebody that I really advocate for. Even during the whole process, we felt like the soft skill was like really like we were like kind of like having some yellow flag, almost red. But I was keeping like pushing because what he knows and like his expertise like fits with what we have like in terms of new project in our SRE infrastructure. So at the end, they hired him. I really did like. I was asking like the network people that knows him at Criteo to go talk to the hiring manager and say like, hey, he's a good guy, blah blah. Yeah. And at the end, what happened is, after like a couple of months, he was starting like as we think, he was pushing. He wanted like rebuild everything. Even he knows that during the hiring process it was not possible. And then he started to brainwashing like people around him. It was kind of a poison. So and people start to like joining his crew or not. And then inside the SR infrastructure there was like 2 teams. And they were like just fighting each other like all the time, and at the end like lots of people like thinks that I'm like I shouldn't have hired that guy, and I think I shouldn't have. And now he's freelance, so I can give you his name, like so you make sure you don't hire this guy. And maybe he's here, no, maybe not. And yeah, I mean I think it was my biggest mistake is like even he's like someone is good, like soft skill is too important, and when you're like. Yeah, my mistake was like I was pushing too much, and now like and lots of people left Criteo after that. But now they're anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
So I think if failure comes in terms of you have somebody who doesn't work out or somebody who lashes out the company because of a mistake. But my failure was more about internal expectations and getting somebody through the process. So my previous company, I used to work at a digital agency that was very unhip. We had a lot of very boring clients who expected us to be very like suit and tied up whenever we would go to visit them. And we had a whole handbook of things that we were supposed to do and look like. And one of those was that we had to have hair that was colored a natural color. And it was hidden under 100 pages of these nonsense types of rules. And I was hiring for a front-end development position at the time. And there was a woman who had come through the process, and she was amazing. She checked all the boxes, she had all the skills, but she had pink hair. And so I always sort of just assumed it wouldn't be a problem. I didn't necessarily, I didn't even think about it. And then we got to the very, very final stages, and I hadn't briefed my CEO at the time that she had pink hair, because again, I didn't think that was necessary to brief. And I guess he went into the sort of final chat with her, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Can you dye your hair?" So to which, of course, she responded, in so many nice words, like, "Go screw yourself, I'm leaving this interview." So in the end, I think there were a few lessons on my side. If there is some sort of mismatch in internal expectations, even if you perceive them as being outdated and overly traditional and onerous, you should still make sure that you have that conversation beforehand. Before you bring the person on site. And if there is maybe a need to align expectations more, try to handle it in a better manner than, asking somebody day of if they can dye their hair brown. So that was an interesting learning experience for me.
Okay. Yeah, definitely interesting, the pink hair story. Okay, thank you very much for coming. And we'll be around if you have other questions. And I hope you have learned some things, or at least you have questions in your head about recruiting. And if you have other things you want to share, we'll be happy to meet you right after. Thank you.